Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keenan Wellar, and I'm here to welcome you to From Presence to Citizenship 2021. While we are all taking part here online from all parts of Ontario and beyond, as the technical host of this gathering, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I am based, where the laptop is sitting that is making this broadcast possible, is in the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I've seen the criticisms of land acknowledgements. If they are done as a rote practice and without meaning, then it's a bigger insult than not doing them at all. I thought about that, and I thought about the Algonquin people being here long before their first encounter with Samuel de Champlain some 420 years ago, and how it took just a few decades to destroy their way of life. So to give additional meaning to today's acknowledgement, I believe it's worthwhile to reflect on the recent history of the reserve system, residential schools, and the reality of today that Indigenous children are still being removed from their families at a greater rate than the rest of the population, that these issues are not without meaning or connection to our task here today. As communities, provinces, and Canadians, we are still struggling with how to make things right for our Indigenous communities, or to at least make things less wrong. And that, of course, leads me to the connection with our collective efforts to support a better life for people with intellectual disabilities in all of our communities across the province. The decisions we make today and in the days and months ahead will all have long-lasting implications. None of us has all the answers, but it is great to see you all here today, because recognizing that we are in the struggle and that we try to do the right things means our chances of success are dramatically higher than if we neither acknowledge that there are problems nor seek answers so we can progress. De plus, pendant que nous discutons des groupes de Canadiens qui ne sont pas inclus de manière appropriée, je veux saluer tous les francophones et les organismes qui soutiennent les citoyens francophones de l'Ontario. Cette présentation en webinaire est donnée en anglais seulement, et nous espérons y remédier, avec peut-être l'aide d'un nouveau champion qui rejoint notre réseau et peut apporter leurs divers talents, y compris leur capacité linguistique à notre communauté d'apprentissage. So, you may have a few questions right from the start. I'll give you a few quick answers. You are going to hear from David Chalmers in a moment, and that might be a bit confusing, since many of you have worked with him to support your staff teams with leadership and performance, so you might be wondering why he's leading off a webinar that is otherwise represented by leaders of developmental services agencies. The short answer is, David also does individual and organizational coaching. And when the pandemic hit in the spring, the From Presence to Citizenship leadership team needed some help to figure out what, if anything, we wanted to do next, beyond continuing to support each other as individual leaders and agencies. Another question might be, why is Keenan Wellar acting like the host of this, when his colleagues are vastly superior to him in every way? But that's where your question is flawed, because they're only better than me in almost every way. I have a slight edge in the technology department, and that's why I am taking on some hosting duties today. And who are those colleagues? Jim Turner, Executive Director, Community Living Atikokan. Jim serves as our chair, and if we were having this meeting in a banquet hall instead of on Zoom, you'd be hearing from him instead of me. Deborah Everley, Chief Executive Officer, Kenora Association for Community Living. Debbie Cavers, Executive Director, Community Living Brant. Tina Williams, Executive Director, Community Living Upper Ottawa Valley. Maurice Voisin, Executive Director at Southeast Grey Support Services. John Policicchio, Executive Director, Community Living Algoma. And I'm Keenan Wellar, co-leader at LiveWorkPlay in Ottawa. A quick shout out also to Lisa Foster at Community Living Thunder Bay, Chris Grayson, formerly of Community Living Upper Ottawa Valley, Keith D, formerly at Community Living Ontario, and Janet Reensbury, formerly at Community Living Brant, who all contributed several years to From Presence to Citizenship. There are many others, including many of you attending here this afternoon, as well as MCCSS staff, elected officials, family members, and advocates with disabilities, as well as thought leaders that are too numerous to name, who have made significant contributions to our annual learning exchanges, and of course, to our lived experiences with our own agencies. So we thank you as well for all you have done and all that is to come. Lastly, From Presence to Citizenship is a learning community, but today is a lot of information coming at you in a one-way conversation, which you rightly might point out is not very communal. That's a fair point. So just to let you know, our purpose here today is mainly about setting a baseline for understanding what From Presence to Citizenship is all about. And if it seems a good fit for you, it is an invitation to join in on the conversations to come. We will do some Q&A at the end if time allows, but today will be a broadcast type of experience, and that is by design. There is a 2-minute survey to complete, where you can also indicate your interest in continuing the conversation, and we'll be working with all of you who are interested to engage with us very differently going forward. I will share the survey link at the end, but it's also on our website, fptc.ca. So that's all you need to remember, and our logo and website address will be up for most of the webinar. Which reminds me, before I hand off to David, we are also recording today's session and will host the resulting video on our website. So while we encourage you, keep your video live because we want to see you rolling your eyes, laughing, sighing, and crying. If you don't want to risk being a part of the video, by all means, just turn it off as needed, and that's just fine. So thank you for being here, and it's time for our introductory remarks with David Chalmers of Nexus Human Capital.
Good afternoon, and welcome to From Presence to Citizenship's introductory webinar. From Presence to Citizenship was born out of a philosophical conversation by a small group of executive directors who in 2014, and unbeknownst to one another at the time, were exploring organizational practices, structures, and service delivery models that would enhance the lived experiences of individuals being supported by their respective agencies to realize self-determination in all aspects of their lives, to realize full citizenship. The importance of having autonomy over what we do with our time, who we spend it with, where we live, and even the ability to accept risk in those decisions are fundamental to the human experience and to the quality of our lives. As this small group of executive directors continued their discussions, discovered other like-minded colleagues, and sought out thought leaders who are committed to community building, a decision was made to host a conference. With the benefit of funding from what is now MCCSS, the first From Presence to Citizenship conference took place in 2016. The conference drew 300 participants and continued to do so annually for the next 4 years. During these learning exchanges, agencies, individuals with disabilities, family members, and community leaders highlighted their stories, their research, and their reflections with respect to breaking down walls and building bridges to facilitate full citizenship of supported individuals across their communities. Interest in these stories, as well as insights and resources shared by various speakers, underscored the importance of reimagining the role of agencies, their relationships with community service providers and with employers, and deepening the role of staff and the ways they engage with individuals receiving support. In response both to a changing sector and continued interest from agencies to learn from one another, From Presence to Citizenship has evolved into what can best be described as a learning community. This afternoon, we'll have an opportunity to hear from organizing members From Presence to Citizenship and learn about the principles that support their philosophy. We'll also learn how agencies can learn from one another through From Presence to Citizenship to evolve their practices through the principles of this community of practice. I'm David Chalmers. I teach and work in the area of organizational psychology. I've had the pleasure of working and learning with many of you and your agencies to build leadership capacity and other related initiatives. I've been pleased to work with the organizing members of From Presence to Citizenship in these respects and to facilitate the development of their learning community. It is my pleasure to introduce Jim Turner, Maurice Voisin, Marg McLean, Debbie Cavers, Tina Williams, Keenan Wellar, John Policicchio, and Debbie Everley for what will be an afternoon of wonderful learning and an invitation to continue learning and sharing with one another.
What is From Presence to Citizenship? Quite simply, it breaks down to it's like-minded organizations, leaders, and individuals having conversations. From our learning exchanges, to now being a learning community, we have a philosophy in common. That is, that may be similar to your beliefs or that of your agency. We have gained insight, built stronger practices, and challenged our thinking as a result of our shared experiences. We believe the term citizenship is linked to exercised rights and responsibilities. The journey on a path for those we support from presence to citizenship is about their lived experiences, moves past being simply present, and belongs to a trusted place in our society, which is being a true citizen. It's about choice, and choice is about having personal control over your life. A citizen makes choices. We need to recognize that supported decision making is about individuals making their own choices. It's about having personal control through our own support networks. All of the agencies involved in From Presence to Citizenship are works in progress that have made important decisions that, while we move away from congregated programs and settings, we will not create further programs that deny people genuine choice. How does an agency ensure that they take the necessary steps to ensure success as they modernize their support services and practices? That was the initial conversation that took place over coffee of the group that eventually formed From Presence to Citizenship 7 years ago. In our conversation, knowledge and information is shared and exchanged. If an agency is going to move from program-based supports to person-directed supports, it must first change the culture of their agency. But where and how does an agency's leadership team learn about this? Knowledge is exchanged and shared is how agency leaders and From Presence to Citizenship support each other. We're there as mentors when needed to share our experiences and what we've learned as agencies. As well, over the past 6 years, From Presence to Citizenship has utilized key influencers from within Canada and internationally that support person-directed ideas and practices as speakers at our learning exchange. We have strong connections with these people who have spoke at our conferences and with their organizations, and we're happy to make introductions for agencies wanting to utilize the skills of these connections as an agency reforms their support services. At this point, Maurice, you were one of the people I turned to when I needed a mentor. You and your senior team supported my team as we began on our journey reforming our support services. Please share some of the conversations we had almost a decade ago.
Well, thanks, Jim. I'll just tell you a little bit about our organization. So Southeast Grey Support Services is small rural community living in southern Grey County. We had a major agency transformation in the late 80s and early 90s that moved us away from group living and group homes, and then in the early 1990s closed our sheltered workshop. I guess that's significant because at that time a lot of agencies were having ribbon cutting ceremonies to open congregate day settings or sheltered workshops. So I was very fortunate to come in 2003 and participate in our agency. Like Jim mentioned, we hosted a number of agency staff and families and some board members over the years who are interested in making changes. We don't have to do much. We just introduce and invite people to come into people we support, their homes. They're the people that show what it's like to be independent and to have their own decision making. Self-determination and choice is so important for the model that that we use to be successful. You know, just basic questions like where you live and with whom and who you choose for staff, and when you're part of a plan, the plan becomes you. So and at times you may need supported decision making to kind of weigh out the options. One of the people that we support in the family says, they've got a nice tagline that says, "Nothing about me without me." And I try to keep that in mind when we're making decisions. I was involved in a quality of life study through the University of Toronto Center for Health Promotion in the early 1990s. And they did some evaluations and follow-up from people that left facilities in the late 80s when the government was starting to move people out of facilities. They had a whole array of questions, but when it boiled down to determine someone's quality of life, if you could only ask one question to determine, and that was a high correlation to a high quality of life, it's, do you have a key to your front door? It's a pretty basic thing, but when we look at our own lives, you know, we all have keys for our cars and homes or whatever, and why shouldn't people that we support have that ownership? Everyone brings gifts. Our job as staff and agencies is to recognize that these gifts and the opportunities to share with our community. At the same time, there's a dignity of risk, like having the same opportunities and experiences as other adults to make decisions that affect the person's life. We know that we all learn from our decisions, and it's a vital part of fulfilling your life in the community. And to deny that, even though there's risks, I think the dignity of risk is kind of that overbearing message, I think, that we want to promote and support. You know, just to give you an example, facilities were once thought of a place where risk was minimized, but we know that it's not true with the aftermath of what people told us after facilities closed in 2009. Our agency, we try to celebrate the uniqueness of each person supported. We focus on their strengths and the skills of each person. And then we identify what the needs are for them to be successful, not as a weakness, but as a need. We all have needs, and that shouldn't be foreign to any of us. Jim mentioned about being part of a true citizen, and we think that to be included in one's community, there's two main prongs. The first is to be accepted as a neighbor, a person with gifts, as a contributor, and as a citizen. The second is accepting the responsibilities of a citizen. That means respecting others, community property, your neighbors, contributing where you can, and having some pride in your home and property. And when those two mesh, that really becomes a true citizen. Also developing reciprocal relationships with your neighbors and your friends and other citizens. We think that is crucial as well. Perhaps people would consider volunteer opportunities like joining a service club or a church or a cultural group, a festival committee, sports or recreation teams, a theater group, a community betterment cause, nature trail formation, basic things that we all do as community members. The other thing that we need to develop, that interdependence where you and others are both supported to achieve goals, and kind of that the sum of the members' efforts is greater than you can achieve on your own. So, you know, together we're stronger, and having that kind of model going forward. And then finally, just recognize the importance of how we care for others in the community, and support them kind of in a truly strengthening citizenship bonds for all to build and to have a stronger community.
I would like to speak with you today about the guiding philosophies of From Presence to Citizenship, to speak to what our fundamental beliefs, guidelines, and principles are, and that are the touchstones we return to when we think about the work we do. We believe working within these principles will guide our work so that it is done, as the Anishinaabe people of this area say, in a good way. The philosophical principles of From Presence to Citizenship are practical in the moment and aspirational in their consequence. They work toward a different future. It's times like these when I'm asked to speak to the compelling vision of a different world, to a different experience for people who receive our support, when I wish I was a poet. Poetry, literature, and language, it matters because language speaks to our hearts, minds, and souls. We were vividly reminded of that last week when Amanda Gorman recited her stunning poem, The Hill We Climb, at the inauguration ceremony. And who can forget Shane Quayzan's poem, We Are More, during the opening ceremony of the Vancouver Olympics? Poems like these, they tell the story of the human heart, revealing truths and insights, inspiring us to creativity and joy, and they act as a catalyst to overcome our fears. A poem provides doors and mirrors into the perspective and lives of others, and is a way to document the world, to say what needs to be said in a direct, powerful, and beautiful way. Poetry lets us create a picture of that which does not yet exist. As Shane wrote, we are in the process of being realized. Because as we are speaking with you today about the lived experience of citizenship for people our organizations are asked to serve, we are speaking about something that does not yet exist for all people. To the creation of a different kind of society, reflected in different kinds of organizations doing work in different ways, that we believe requires we open our minds and hearts to welcome in an exercise of collective imagination, to reimagine a more inclusive image of a citizen, where the contributions of everyone are valued, even if they are not the outputs of civic, political, and economic engagement as currently defined. From Presence to Citizenship recognizes the journey of people supported and their allies, from the painful memories of the institutions that once housed society's most vulnerable, to the repatriation of people back to their families, schools, and neighborhoods, where their presence in community was acknowledged if not valued. Presence to Citizenship affirms that many service providers have been allies with people and their families as we broke down the walls of institutions, welcomed people home, and in supporting people to have a presence in the community, we provided an opportunity for others to have a glimpse into the positive impact that people with intellectual challenges can have within a community. As we continue to learn with people within the construct of presence, which has been a positive and important service paradigm for much of the work in the developmental services sector, we have come to understand that people we support can occupy space in communities without experiencing a genuine sense of belonging that will only resonate from an authentic and deserved voice, as well as opportunities to make meaningful and valued contributions. Contributions that are seen as fulfilling the obligations of citizenship. The term citizenship is linked to exercise rights and responsibilities. It moves past experience to a trusted place within our society. At the level of the person, it requires the removal of encumbrances that preclude fundamental decisions can be made by that person. Decisions like, where and with whom do I want to live? Or how do I want my basic needs to be met? It means that people have the autonomy to make their choices, the supports to have their choices heard and understood, and the commitment of those around them to act together in good faith when those choices are made. Choice is about having personal control in your life. People direct. They are not merely at the center of the thinking that occurs at meetings and discussions amongst service providers. Choice requires support providers have the skills of profound listening, first to the words and behavior of the person, and continues with listening to those who know and care about the person. Choices need to be supported in the right way, at the right time, and in order to achieve the person's personal vision for their lifestyle, now and in the future. In order to understand what a person is saying about the dreams they have and the supports they want and need, requires an investment in time for people to develop relationships with each other and to hold their stories and dreams sacred. It requires an investment in time to give people opportunities to learn about choices they might have, the strengths and gifts they have, and how these gifts can be offered to others, and for people to realize and then exercise their own personal power. Supports that honor choice need to be what people both want and need, and that are given in a way that is dignifying to the person during the support experience, and that deliver just enough support to be liberating, and that enable a person to achieve the kind of life in the community they find meaningful and satisfying. Supports that bolster and lift people up, that empower by helping people gain insight into their own gifts and strengths, and not supports that keep them dependent on the disability system that must by necessity compromise their preferred lifestyle. Recognizing that many people have had little experience making choices or have life stories that cause them to make choices that may cause them personal harm, or when they do not choose a support that could make a positive difference, that does not mean that they are abandoned to the consequences of those choices. Each choice has its consequence, and an informed choice is one where the consequence is understood. Support must affirm the dignity of risk when the choices made are not what we might consider the right ones, and when the consequences are harsh. So our supportive relationships must focus on being non-judgmental, and they are characterized by trustworthiness, steadfastness, tenacity, reliability, and constancy. Honoring personal choice will not be cost-effective unless community resources are used. The investment of system resources into helping people become richly connected to the networks of people and associations that make up community life take effort and creativity. But without this intentional investment, the personal networks will not develop and people will be vulnerable to system uncertainty. Our commitments are to the person, not the program. And that means system resources are used to support the dreams, desires, and aspirations of people, to find their gifts so that they can find their place of belonging in the community and heal from the harms that a marginalized life has imposed. A commitment to the person starts with, yes, we will do this, before it ever moves into the work of how, and it never spends energy finding reasons to justify why something cannot be done. We are humble that people are complex and always changing, and that it is only through suspending our own stories about how we know what is right or best for anyone, and through our own heart connections, not professional obligations, that lives change and people find true well-being and belonging. We acknowledge this is not where we are today. Me as a leader, my organization, my community, this sector, we have a lot to do to figure out with people. Our commitment at From Presence to Citizenship is to use these touchstones to keep ourselves grounded in making change, one person at a time, every time we are invited to do so. We do not presume to have all the answers. We can't tell you that doing this work is easy or that you will have solid ground beneath you. We only have what we have learned, and we have our stories and experience of what we have seen and heard and learned along the way. We hope you can find them helpful in your vision of a different future for the people you serve in your communities. I started today wishing I was a poet so that I could find the most beautiful way to put this possibility for a different kind of future into your hearts and minds. But I will end my time with you with a poem that I often use to remind myself of the fundamental nature of the work and the path that we are on with the people who ask us to be part of their lives. It's by T.S. Eliot. You say I am repeating something I have said before. I shall say it again. To arrive where you are, to get where you are not, you must go by a way wherein there is no ecstasy. In order to arrive at what you do not know, you must go by a way which is the way of ignorance. In order to possess what you do not possess, you must go by the way of dispossession. In order to arrive at what you are not, you must go through the way in which you are not. And what you do not know is the only thing you know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie, for sharing the From Presence to Citizenship guiding philosophy for today's webinar. Further to the information shared by Debbie, I wanted to elaborate on how the guiding philosophy extends to our respective organizations, as well as organizations on the journey towards citizenship. Our work is deeply rooted in understanding and knowing the individual we support, and to explore with them their areas of interest, their wishes, their goals. Once this information is obtained, typically through person-directed planning sessions, we focus our efforts on identifying the support worker, identified through the right match process, and the journey to support people to realize their goals. The journey frequently includes providing an individual with a range of opportunities and experiences so that a person can choose from a range of options. One experience, one opportunity is not a choice. Organizations currently associated with From Presence to Citizenship are focused on their role as community builders, continually pursuing solutions within the community, facilitating connections that enable inclusion, enhance and support relationships, and ensure ongoing involvement in the life of their community. Another term frequently used is ambassadors. Organization leaders and direct support professionals have to become ambassadors and advocates for inclusion and citizenship. We continually seek opportunities to passionately promote inclusion and reinforce the sharing of success stories to support learning and growth mindset. In order to recognize the uniqueness of each individual and the uniqueness of their goals and aspirations, we are continually having to realign both human and financial resources into community-based supports. It becomes impossible to stay true to individualized and person-directed approaches, by providing congregated and segregated supports, such as group homes and day programs. One of our colleagues so eloquently states, "If the community does it, we don't." This mindset is critical to inclusion and citizenship. Our role as service providers is to facilitate opportunities, offer just enough support, and to facilitate community connections that enable choices to be made. This is more than person-centered. From Presence to Citizenship endorses the concept of person-directed approaches. Person-directed approaches are focused on the individual and not what the current system has to offer. System resources are only considered after an individual's dreams, interests, and gifts have been discovered. Resources are realigned to support people to achieve their dreams and utilize their gifts to contribute to community. The approach requires us to ask, how can we do this, rather than finding barriers and reasons why it cannot be done. Focus on building linkages and bridges to community. The end result, when a person is supported to reach their dreams and be supported as a unique individual, is well worth the effort. It's the right thing to do, as it fulfills our commitment to inclusion and citizenship for all people. With respect to congregate living situations, From Presence to Citizenship espouses to the fact that the need to have a home of one's choice, whether it be by yourself or with others, is foundational to a life of self-determination. Although some of us have an element of congregate living situations that remain within our respective organizations, we have implemented plans to eliminate congregate living settings, plans to divest of the homes and properties, and to significantly reduce or eliminate our responsibility as landlords and property managers. 3 organizations associated with From Presence to Citizenship have shared data and information with the ministry that demonstrates that enhancing quality of life does not cost more. We know there are many more organizations that have also reached the same conclusion. I suggest that you read, if you have not already done so, the paper written by Michael Kendrick entitled "Why Group Homes Are No Longer Optimal." Michael refers to the fact that congregate settings do not foster citizenship, they create segregation. The same can be said about day programs where people with an intellectual disability gather. From Presence to Citizenship has compiled many success stories about individuals who have transitioned to community-based supports and solutions, be it housing, employment, volunteerism, joining a club, or selling tickets. We would be very pleased to share these with you. As I conclude my presentation, I wanted to leave all of you with a question to consider. My question for each of you to think about is, why would you not consider a transition to community, to inclusion, and to citizenship? During this next segment of this webinar, I will be sharing information on what it is that From Presence to Citizenship is interested in accomplishing. One of the top priorities of From Presence to Citizenship is our interest to provide resource-rich support and guidance to organizations that are interested in the transformation from programs, congregated and segregated services and supports, to community-based, person-directed, and individualized support for each person. We want to achieve this by creating a network of organizations that can share their knowledge and experience about their journey toward citizenship with other organizations interested in or already on the journey and are keen to learn from their experiences. Since 2016, From Presence to Citizenship has hosted learning exchange forums with provincial and international speakers and subject matter experts to share their knowledge and wisdom about key topics such as building welcoming, inclusive, and diverse communities, and the importance and significance of citizenship for all people. Although our ability to plan, organize, and host ongoing learning exchange forums is somewhat limited moving forward, we can collectively strive to share learning sessions with colleagues throughout the sector and within our respective communities. Upon review of the survey feedback from the learning exchange forums, we consistently heard from participants the message about how important it is to share knowledge and experiences of the journey towards citizenship with each other. We also heard the need to share stories of success that we can learn from and the need to support each other through this dynamic and transformational journey. From Presence to Citizenship takes considerable pride in stressing to organizations the need and importance of supporting employees, both direct support professionals and management personnel, to enhance their individual leadership capacity in order to influence both internal and external change. Growth and development opportunities are required for any change process to be successful. The current From Presence to Citizenship organizations have experienced significant transformational change by ensuring that the unique abilities of each employee are effectively and appropriately matched with the goals, dreams, and wishes of each individual supported. We have witnessed the magic that occurs in an individual's life when the right match is discovered. Over the years, From Presence to Citizenship has compiled and shared stories of success with organizations we have supported. A key element of these success stories has been the right match. There are many ways to create the right match opportunities within both unionized and non-unionized settings. In addition to the importance of the right match, we cannot stress or underestimate the value of continuous learning and knowledge transfer that takes place through presentations, stories, discussions about what worked, what did not work, and sharing things to consider. From Presence to Citizenship has keenly been interested in engaging knowledge transfer and knowledge exchange both within and external to the developmental services sector. The opportunity to share experiences, learn from each other, and to R&D, rob and duplicate, things like ideas, policies, plans, etc., affords each of our respective organizations with opportunities to not have to reinvent the thinking, the approach, and the solutions towards citizenship. Our engagement and support approach has resulted in collaboration, cohesiveness, confidence, and trust amongst organizations. We have observed, supported, and partnered with organizations that have shifted from program thinking to person-directed and individualized approaches. Through these experiences, From Presence to Citizenship is confident that the goal of citizenship for all Ontarians with an intellectual disability is realistic, achievable, and attainable throughout the developmental services sector. Over the years, From Presence to Citizenship has developed relationships and provided elements of support to the provincial government, whether through special projects, data sharing, data collection, queries, and traveling throughout the province, has influenced creative and innovative thinking within the Ministry of Children, Community, and Social Services, and has helped shape and support government policy and direction related to transformation. We are very pleased that the term citizenship is referred to in government direction and reform plans, and to also see it included in the proposed vision for developmental services that was recently shared with the reform consultations. We want to continue supporting and working with the provincial government through information sharing and informal dialogue to ensure that the goal of citizenship is preserved and enforced. We also want the ministry to be aware that we are an available resource group for them to reach out and access as required. The Ontario government should set the goal of citizenship for the entire developmental services sector. Critical to any work that From Presence to Citizenship has performed and wishes to continue is our commitment to support families, employers, community services, the arts and culture community, the education and health sectors, recreation, and other stakeholders that are interested in supporting the principles of From Presence to Citizenship. Some organizations have historically tapped into our knowledge, wisdom, and experience and requested our participation in a variety of family forums to share our journey, the bumps, the stories, and the importance of citizenship. We have been invited to participate in a variety of panel discussions throughout various communities. We have planned, organized, and hosted learning exchange forums since 2016 and for approximately 300 employees each year. We have hosted and invited participants to a variety of learning exchanges sponsored by our respective organizations. We have participated in conversations with employer groups in various communities promoting employment opportunities for individuals with an intellectual disability. We have participated in countless information and knowledge sharing sessions with leaders and employees of approximately 90 developmental service organizations. We are committed to continuing this work and enhancing opportunities for other organizations to share their journey, their experiences, in order to fulfill our goal of providing resource-rich support throughout the sector. The inspiration and motivation is to fulfill a vision of citizenship for all people. As a result, From Presence to Citizenship is interested to continue the work of influencing and inspiring individuals, families, and organizations to imagine and create alternatives to congregated and segregated models of support, to focus on the opportunities and the potential within a community, and to foster welcoming, diverse, and inclusive communities for all people. The pursuit of community-based residential alternatives through partnerships and social capital, and the pursuit of community-based supports where real relationships evolve, inspires our individual and collective efforts. We have witnessed the positive outcomes that are achieved through volunteer opportunities, employment opportunities, joining a club, or spending time with a neighbor. Relationships are enhanced, friendships evolve, and individual support circles are expanded and enriched, affording greater opportunities and experiences that further enrich an individual's quality of life. We are deeply committed to work with you as you move forward on your organization's journey towards citizenship, no matter at what stage of this journey your organization is at. From Presence to Citizenship believes that no organization needs to walk alone on their journey towards citizenship, and that the knowledge we can share and transfer with each other can make a significant difference to enhance the confidence, courage, commitment, and determination that the goal of achieving citizenship for all people requires. Because our starting point has been similar, we have all experienced providing program models of support at one point in our history. We attend to supporting others from a position of understanding and work with you by sharing knowledge, experiences, the mistakes we made, how our learning has grown, and the successes we have experienced. I hope this segment of the webinar has provided you with an understanding and appreciation for what From Presence to Citizenship work is hoping to accomplish. We look forward to your ongoing queries, your sharing of knowledge, and your acceptance of learning opportunities as we focus our attention on the goal of citizenship for all people. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to share with you a bit about what we as an agency have learned in our shift to moving towards building relationships. And this is a process using an asset-based community development lens, or an ABCD lens. It's been a strategic focus for us to dig deep into this world of ABCD. It's been about learning about the value and the purpose of those neighborhood and formal and informal relationships that each person needs in their life. For us here at Community Living Brant, this excitement's grown in the past year since we obtained a Trillium grant to explore belonging and citizenship. We've learned that participating in the life of your community is not the same as belonging in your community. So a little bit about what have we learned in this process, this journey that we've undertaken for the past number of years. We've learned that relationships and belonging are often found outside the system, our system, or the hairball, that's what we call it here at Community Living Brant. The more internalized and separated our services are from community, then those things like relationships and being part of your neighborhood don't happen as often. And we need those things in place to build our network of friends, our network of neighbors, and our social roles. We learned that we need to find for each of us, whether you're a support staff, family member, person receiving services, find your gift, find your passion, and then find where and with whom you can share that in your neighborhood or in your community. We've also learned a lot about ourselves, and that for a lot of us, being comfortable to reach out to people in your neighborhood or in your community that you don't know, to learn about what's happening or to try to connect either yourself or someone else is often a really hard task. I think we take it for granted, we took it for granted sometimes that would be a task that was easy for all of us to do. But sometimes making that first jump or that first connection is hard for some of us. We've also had to get better at practicing this for ourselves. We learned that if we want to help people we support in making those natural connections and those relationships, we had to have lots of discovery and lots of learning about how we do that in our own lives, because our lives are part of our community as it is for folks that we support. Learned about showing up and contributing, that one of the most important things we can do is sharing our gift. That's part of ABCD, it's part of belonging in your community, is to share and exchange your assets. We saw that we, as a system and as an organization, often created our own barriers to people belonging. We had to learn to take the lens that none of us as citizens had to learn how to act or to behave in a certain way to belong. We just had to find the place where we belong. And if we can't find that place where we belong, how do we go about creating that for the person or for ourselves? What have we learned in terms of our role and our work over the past few years? We've reframed our conversations in community, really practical things about looking at our language and trying to avoid that service language talk, not calling ourselves staff, not pointing out or discussing disability as a starting point of conversation. We also had to both understand and to believe in the gifts of each person, and that each person that we support has a gift that needs to be shared in community. We see too that and learned that those relationships that people are forming and creating, that sense of belonging that's outside our services, has other things that have unfolded, such as creating better safety for folks, better health outcomes for people, decreased loneliness, just to name a few of the things that we've noticed in terms of our work and our journey. Another practical thing that we've spent a lot of time working on is practicing how to do community mapping. And we did that by practicing both for ourselves and for the people that we support. Even those of us who've been part of our neighborhood or community for a long, long time and thought we knew a lot about who was where and what was happening, discovered there is much more when you take a lens of what is my gift, and where might I share that in my community? And there's lots of hidden places and lots of informal neighborhood pieces that we were not obviously aware of when we put on this different lens of ABCD. We are really trying to learn and recognize also where we are in terms of supporting people to truly belong. That learning is understanding what space do we find ourselves in supporting people. And those spaces that we've learned about are we doing to people? Are we doing for people? Are we doing with people? Or are we being by people? And we've discovered that for many of us, we often feel safest in those first two spaces. That's a lot of the history about what we did when we supported people in the past, when we helped to take care of people or ensure that people were well or safe. Somehow that turned into doing to people or doing for people. We quickly learned that don't create those opportunities to contribute internally, because that's doing it to people or for people. Our work now as we move forward is learning to shift out of that role of becoming the support that helps people to get into that by space, where people can say, this is done by us, for us. For us, there's so much more for us to do, but it's really exciting times to see how the shift of taking this ABCD approach or ABCD lens to how we belong in community unfolds. And I'm really excited to share a little bit about that with you today. Thank you.
The approach Debbie has described is very similar to how we support people at LiveWorkPlay, and I'm sure quite familiar to most, if not all of you tuning in here today. But the phrase just enough support has been mentioned a couple of times already today, and I just wanted to talk about that a bit. It is a concept that we have embraced at LiveWorkPlay and have kind of taken it a bit further in terms of developing our own principles to explain how the concept functions in day-to-day operations and in support of individuals. So you'll hear a lot about person-directed, which is really appropriate in an important conversation in our sector. And for us, that's reflected in the principle known as honoring personal autonomy. And that's really deliberate there on the poster, that is the basis around which everything else operates. And really what we're saying there is just putting the person at the heart of their own decision-making and their own experience of daily life. So it's far beyond a plan that the person's been involved in, and then we just reference back to the plan all the time. You know, what's in the plan? Well, it's a person-directed plan, and therefore if we're following the plan, we're doing our jobs appropriately. The honoring personal autonomy principle calls us to continuously reflect on the support we're providing and how it is supporting the autonomy of that person to make decisions, including changes to something that might already be on a piece of paper, or that maybe we even talked about it yesterday and they feel differently today. And Tim there with the folded arms is a great example of someone who's been supported always with his parents with respect to personal autonomy, and we're doing our best to carry that forward as primary supports in Tim's life. And a good example of that was when I really wanted a photo for the poster, and Tim said he would volunteer for that. And when the photographer arrived and Tim was wearing his purple gardening clogs, it was suggested perhaps he would change his footwear. And Tim said, you can either have the picture with the footwear or not have the picture. So well done, Tim, in living the principle. And person-centered thinking is obviously closely tied to the central principle of honoring personal autonomy. And it's really just another reminder that whether it's families, individuals we support, our own staff, members of the community, to really work hard at looking at the perspective of those other persons and make sure that's included in our thinking. Of course, we have all kinds of pressures, pushes, and pulls, internal and external, that influence our decisions. But really putting the people we support at the heart of our thinking at all times. Always building bridges. This is a great reminder about not replacing natural relationships in community. So how do we always think of ourselves as connectors and not replacements? Because we don't want to, literally reduce the relationships in a person's life by replacing them, or really, hold back people from developing new relationships by not supporting them to meet new people in community venues and build new relationships. Assets-based solutions, I think that's obvious and probably relevant to all of your work. I'm sure you're always thinking about what the person has to offer and how to bring their gifts and talents to bear to the benefit of the community and others around them. But, you know, a lot of our assessment processes and, you know, a lot of the paperwork and the planning in our sector is still, you know, very focused on deficits. It's a complaint we hear about often from individuals and their families. And so really focusing on assets, and that's been a huge help in our employment supports, which we'll be talking about later. Authentic valued roles, that's just a reminder that similar to not replacing relationships, not replacing roles, not making up roles like within our agency to replace authentic and genuine valued roles in the community. So, you know, whether it's friend, co-worker, teammate, how can we make sure that those are authentic experiences, reciprocal with others in the community, and in genuine venues that are shared by all citizens. And that leads me to the community first solutions. So I often tell kind of a long story about 15 years ago when we still had our congregate programs. And of course, as all of you know, fitness and health are always two things that people want in a day program. And so we were attempting to do all that with the various cooking and kitchen activities. And also we ended up raising a bunch of money and effectively built our own gym right within the agency in the day program. And of course, years later, we reflect on that and we go, what were we doing? People were getting on a bus for a long trip and going past several gyms on their way to the day program so they could exercise with the same people every day forever. And so that's a picture there of Jillian at the local YMCA. There's a real community hub at the YMCA in downtown Ottawa, as I'm sure is common in most of them. And basically in everything we do, what is the community first solution? And if that community is not ready or needs help to supporting people, what can we do to change that rather than create some kind of parallel structure in agency land? And last but not least, barrier busting tech. So there has been rapid development in the last few years, and I know many of you have done great work in experimenting and implementing technological solutions. You know, things like coded locks for people that had trouble looking after a key. A small thing, but life-changing, right? So if the barrier or a barrier to having your own home was, you know, security issues, we can solve a lot of those now with coded locks, video, apps. There's an endless number of solutions, but also, you know, use of voice systems, Alexa and Google Voice, and how that has allowed us to get out of the face of people for things that really, it wasn't necessary that we would be in their space. So it could be things like reminders about medications or leaving for appointments or work. And, you know, you can use those devices as two-way communications as well. And so we've implemented that with some people that don't like other technology, but they're okay with that. And it's always about what works for that person, you know, what technology they prefer and how they want to use it and making sure they're in control. So that is just a real quick tour of the LiveWorkPlay version of Just Enough Support and the principles. And, you know, really in the end, the whole concept is based in the neuroscience that shows that, you know, over supporting a person is just as damaging as under supporting a person. I think we don't talk about that enough in our sector. And if you'd like to know more about it, please visit the YouTube channel.
From Presence to Citizenship on housing. Hello, everyone. Although I have only been executive director for the past year, I've been with our agency to see many changes over the last 25. While our leadership, board members, and management may have changed, we have focused on staying true to our values and our visions. It's very similar to the visions within each of your organizations, likely, and not an easy commitment to uphold, ensuring choice is considered in the most fundamental of decisions. As with the principles of providing just enough support, having autonomy of choice extend to decisions around where each of us live and with whom influences all of our other outcomes. Congregate living environments are intense micro settings that are not of choice and are not based around a familial dynamic. They are too often organized around expediency, funding models, or diagnosis. Adding virtual strangers and employees to a home that lends itself to congregate mindset is erosive to meaningful levels of autonomy and self-direction. Home is where our simple and our important decisions are made, and where we most frequently exercise choice. When and what we eat, watch on TV, visit with family and friends, how we budget and become involved in meaningful relationships is essential to the human experience. The fundamental need to have a home of one's choice, whether it be by yourself or with others, is foundational to a life of self-determination. One of the key values that we introduce to our staff on their first day is to see community as a first resort. If expertise or resources are available to any of us in our community, we encourage accessing those same resources for and with the people we support, and not duplicating by trying to fill that role. Whether medical, financial, hygiene, safety, sport, or as a property manager. And so in the same way as we do not act as a medical professional in someone's life, we should not be a hairdresser or a landlord when those same options for choice are available already. Since 2016, we have sold 3 properties and are looking to downsize our ownership portfolio by 2 more in the coming year. We have engaged with dozens of new landlords and foster relationships with many of those. Each organization with From Presence to Citizenship has gone about this a bit differently, but agree that not only do we need to set expectations that our staff teams not be all things to all people, rather a support to access those things as needed, but when there's an expectation that community be the resource for all, then they often exceed those expectations and expect it of others. So maybe that's the message. Set high expectations for community as a first resort and for community resources to be responsive to all. Is there a seniors build going up in your community? The people we support age. Is there a poverty reduction strategy? Many people we support live in poverty. Is there county funding for new landlord-tenant relationships and subsidies? Get in on those. Working with builders and real estate, landlords and municipalities, and providing knowledge and facts that supports our vision has been the most effective way to move from congregate care models. Within our strategic plan, a long-standing commitment is that we will not support more than 4 unrelated people to live together. In fact, we find that most people who aren't in a relationship choose to live alone or with only one other person. It's pretty typical across our society, it seems. The next myth to debunk then is that living alone means you would be lonely. Living alone does not equal loneliness, or at least it doesn't have to. This pandemic aside, think about what creates space of connectedness for you. For me, it's family and gatherings, bonfires, shared work goals, live music venues, kayaking or skiing with friends. And when we ask the people we support when they feel most valued and most connected, it's with family, when they have a common goal with others, when they cheer for the same hockey teams, have colleagues at work, are speaking up on behalf of themselves or others. They're at the gym, they're in a course, and they're in their own neighborhoods. We aren't the first messengers speaking against group homes, but our organizations do have experience helping people to have a quality of life outside of group living. The next myth to debunk is that it would cost more to offer authentic choice, providing support wherever someone might choose to live, than providing congregate settings. This wasn't true when governments funded institutions, and it isn't true on smaller scales either. We can share data that supports this. We can share testimonials of people who are happier, and we can prove staff have been safer, people have been healthier, risks to others are lessened, so is use of PRNs. Having choice and autonomy in it itself is an outcome. Changing our minds and learning from mistakes is how most of us grow and mature. Shouldn't this be afforded to all? Once our support is separated from the physical space that it's provided in, choices can then be explored over and over again.
Home is where the heart is. Sanctity of home. Home is my safe and secure place where I can be myself. There's no place like home. Home, sweet home. For many of us, when we hear these familiar sayings, we think of our own homes, and hopefully that leaves us feeling safe and healthy, happy, loved, and whole. We likely think of the people we choose to share our home with, our neighbors, our pets, our prized possessions, and maybe the trees and flowers surrounding our home and neighborhood. Home, sweet home. A quick story. In the early 1980s, Shelley was someone who wanted to move out of her parents' home, and she would talk about this often. Unfortunately, before she had a chance to move, she had a stroke and ended up in the chronic care end of our local hospital. When we at Community Living started planning to provide support for people in their own homes, we asked Shelley's doctor if he thought we could do it. Could Shelley live outside of the hospital? He responded yes, and that he would try to help us. With the support of her family, her friends, her doctor, physiotherapist, occupational therapist, and Community Living, Shelley, a woman with many challenges, moved into her own apartment and lived there, along with her dog actually for the last 10 or 12 years, for close to 30 years before her death. Although she rented her one-bedroom apartment, she really owned her home. I'm telling you this story for a few reasons. It was close to 40 years ago. Shelley had complex health needs and physical accessibility needs, and she was living in a hospital. But she and her family had a vision of a bigger life. In some communities, Shelley would have stayed in the hospital or been moved into a group home. In St. Mary's, we didn't have group homes. Our board of directors had decided against developing this type of separate, congregate living. Instead, a commitment was made to support people to live in a home of their choosing in their community. People don't need group homes. What we do need is a home to call our own, and all of us need some level of support to lead our best life. Aligned with the principles of just enough support and from presence to citizenship, listening deeply to people, their family and friends, to learn more about what they want in life contributes greatly to the success of creating home. Being creative and open to options beyond the traditional set the stage for designing flexible and responsive supports that are tailor-made for the person and directed by the person. Home can look different depending on who you are and what you expect from a home. Single-family dwelling, condo, apartment, duplex, intentional shared arrangements with someone of your choosing as a housemate, and more. Although everything starts with the person, our role in community development is critical. We need to lay the groundwork in community by developing relationships with key players, including municipal leaders, home builders, developers, your local housing authority, and others committed to security of home for all citizens. Investing in these relationships over time will provide many opportunities to influence the thinking and design of neighborhoods and housing in your community. All citizens benefit from having a wide range of attainable housing, including affordable and accessible housing. A quick story. In my community, the local housing authority owns and operates 2 rent-geared-to-income buildings. They also provide rent supports that are tagged to the person and not the place. Of these 2 options for affordable housing, rent supports preferable to living in one of the 2 buildings. The 2 buildings are separate from community in so many ways. Helping people live in a home that fits their specific housing needs in their desired neighborhood and in the type of home they want is more likely to be successful over the long term. Working with community partners is the way to grow opportunities for a wide range of housing options and a commitment to security of home for all citizens. Through the years, some developmental service agencies developed separate housing corporations. We did that in St. Mary's, and for many years, units owned by our housing corporation only were rented to people supported by Community Living, by our association. This has changed through the years. The mission of the Housing Corporation now is to ensure that accessible and affordable housing options are available to St. Mary's and area citizens with developmental disabilities. We believe in inclusive community. Therefore, we will offer and facilitate development of housing that is inclusive and non-segregated. We define inclusive as neighborhoods and multi-unit dwellings where residents reflect the diversity of our community. We recognize negative social impacts of congregated housing that groups people with similar labels of disability, or income for that matter, which is what I mentioned before. Community living organizations need to bring thoughtful, values-based leadership to all levels of housing, planning, and development in their community. In the absence of this, people with disabilities may be relegated once again to congregated and segregated living. From presence to citizenship. Thank you.
Thanks, Keenan, for talking about your agency's work around just enough support. This fits really well with what we too have learned about how to provide effective employment supports. This notion of starting with the point of how will I fade as a job coach. Here at Community Living Brant, we've offered and held employment supports for over 30 years. In our work, we had to challenge ourselves even further to deeply embrace a culture of employment first. This is work that we really delved into more deeply about 5 years ago, and have seen even further shift in our understanding and belief in the fact that everyone can work. And that, I think that belief is really deeply rooted in the work that we do and is a really important element in terms of success for folks we support and success in terms of our work as a service provider in providing both employment supports. We recognize that for all of us, that understanding about work comes through practice. For most of us, if we look back to our earlier or younger days, all through school, all through our younger days at home or where we lived, we practiced about work, whether that was jobs that we had on a part-time basis through school, whether that was chores or responsibilities that we might have had in our home or in our neighborhood, places that we might have chosen to volunteer at. All of those experiences that we had created that expectation in us that perhaps our family network or our natural support network, our folks that we work with in our school system said to us when we left high school was, what do you want to do? And the answer usually was, do you want to go on to have more education, or are you going out to work? So using that lens has been really important for us in terms of that understanding and that belief and expectation that work is part of people's lives. Paid work. Work also has contributed so much, as we did when we talked about community and belonging. Work contributes, we see, as well to the building of long-term relationships. For many of us, our support network of friends and people that we consider part of our life were found in our work relationships. People have better health. People have a better sense of belonging. There's often a more sense of continuity and security in my life that comes with having some income and that sense of purpose, as well as having valued roles in my life. We really try to embrace, and we really have embraced, the belief that we learn about work and how to work at work. That didn't happen in a training program, and that didn't happen in separate or different spaces. What people need in terms of support is to practice at work, like we did, like we all did when we were growing up. We didn't learn how to act or behave at work in a program. We learned how to be a good worker at work. And for many of us, that also meant learning from both our successes and our failures. And it shaped our decisions as we move forward about what it meant for us and what we wanted in terms of whether that was a career or a long-term goal about what work meant and what it brought to us in our own lives. So using that same lens for folks that we provide service to. We've also learned that we needed to know a lot about what employment means in our community, whether those are statistics, understanding what are employment trends, what is it that employers are looking for, what is needed in our community, and that needs to be shared in a well-communicated data and information with employers, and that focus on demonstrating the reasons why hiring people with disabilities increases things like productivity, decreases employers' costs, folks often have good attendance, and for our employment support staff, this required a great deal of practice for the team and constant updating to be prepared to have those conversations and to engage with employers in a really quick and fruitful way. In our supports, through job coaching or in our supports just in general and helping people figure out where work will take them in their life, was the plan to fade. And that plan to fade is the first step that we undertake. Part of that also was learning how to use technology. How could folks we support use technology that creates confidence, creates independence, and is really seen as pretty typical in any workplace? How do you use technology to do your job, and how do you use it to do your job independently? We done a very detailed work around community mapping for work, the same as we've done in terms of social roles for people. That's been a really interesting strategy in helping folks where maybe transportation is an ongoing issue. How can we help people map out their community, discover employment opportunities, and try them out? We also have a really robust and a very focused discovery process for work. And that's to learn what is most important about employment for the person. This focus is on person-directed plans that include strategies to find work. We use a strategy that we call job attacks. We can do that for a person on an individual basis, or perhaps even targeting a neighborhood or an employment sector. A job attack we often use is gathering that discovery process information about what it is that's most important to the person, and then taking a team approach where we spend several hours, a half a day, etc. And we are literally out and about in our neighborhood or community seeking new employment opportunities, going to places we've never been before, digging a little bit deeper. And those have resulted a number of times in really successful job attainment. So part of our ongoing growth in our employment program has been recognizing and understanding that people supported don't need pre-training to have a job. We've learned that training should be typical and include the things that help me to get a job. And those things are often having a good resume, whether that's in a paper format, whether that's a video resume, whether that's having a portfolio, helping people do working interviews. And then we focused on, if there is training that's needed, it would be things that would be typical or necessary in terms of making me attractive as an employee. So whether those are things like obtaining first aid certification, WMIS, Smart Serve, fork truck certification, all skills or items that when I'm going to a job interview may make me a more successful candidate. We know that work plays a strong role and contributes in many ways to positive outcomes for people. And for us, believing in people was one of the most important first steps that we took.
So once again, we see the very brilliant move of letting Debbie go first, as she covered most of the essential themes that I wanted to talk about with respect to employment supports. And I think I would just add a few of the key tactics and strategies that we've used to experience a lot of success supporting people with intellectual disabilities and autistic persons in employment, and of course, supporting employers to hire great workers. So I think one of the most important decisions, and this is consistent with what Debbie was saying as well, is that in our own intake processes in employment, we put an end to any sort of assessment of people for work readiness. The requirement is only that people actually want to work, and we start from there. And in terms of assessing them for the type of job or sector, that has to do with, as Debbie said, a discovery process of just getting to know people and their interests. And we've learned you have to be very careful. It's a conversation that needs to happen several times, and also needs to be free of other influences and give people a chance to really think for themselves and speak their own minds. And when I say free of other influences, that has a lot to do with the very limited employment experience that people we support often have. It may be only some high school co-ops and not much more. And they may have been told things as a result of those experiences that just aren't true. That you could only work in fast food, or you can only work in waste management, or things like that, that are kind of common choices that people with intellectual disabilities may voice in their first conversations. They only know what they've experienced and what people have told them. And the really amazing thing that has developed in recent years is the huge numbers of people that have been supported into work in office environments in the both the private and public sector. And nowadays we're shifting to supporting people in work from home where that's possible, because of course the pandemic has posed a number of challenges to many of the office work duties that were working out great for people we support. But it's actually working out fairly well, and the pandemic has not been as devastating as we've expected, and that owes to a couple different factors. Of course, having great relationships with the employers, and who in turn really respect and value the work of the people that they have hired through a LiveWorkPlay connection. And also, you know, there's been some emerging opportunities. We just started a new partnership with a company called Wellar that is manufacturing PPE right here in Ottawa. And one of their first moves was to hire 2 people from LiveWorkPlay, and they're great jobs and great place to work. So that's very exciting. One of the important strategies that we have employed perhaps somewhat uniquely is our employment task force approach, which is formally bringing together employers who have hired at least one or more person with an intellectual disability or autistic person, and bringing them together at in-person meetings where that's feasible, not right now, virtual meetings, and really utilizing their experience and really their connections to help with job search and making connections. So, you know, when we're having especially when we're having a difficulty placing someone successfully in employment, bringing forward their profile in an assets-based way and bringing that information to that network of employers and seeing who they might know that would be a good fit for the type of work they're looking for. The other big breakthrough we had was with the federal government, simply because in Ottawa we identified them as one of the largest employers, and of course because they have a mandate for inclusion and diversity, and without a doubt this is not one of the populations that's been well included, you know, anywhere, including in the public sector employment. So that's been ongoing for more than 5 years, and has resulted in you know, more than 100 hires. Not all those turned into long-term hires. Some were contracts that expired and were not renewed. But it's nevertheless a tremendous success, including, I believe, we're getting close to 10 people with indeterminate or permanent employment in the federal public service, which is just an amazing outcome that if you'd asked me 5 years ago, no, that's not going to happen. And it's happening now, really, without you know, a formal commitment with government. We're working on that, and one of the reasons for success there is taking that same employment task force approach, which we use with private sector employers, and we developed it for the public sector. So building a group of champions within the federal public service who are willing to gather and discuss opportunities, you know, work on policies, work on training plans, and it's just been remarkable. And the passion and commitment, and it's, you know, of course you need buy-in from the top on these things, but you know, some of our amazing champions are what you call kind of, you know, mid-level HR people who just want to make a difference. I mean, they believe in a diverse workplace, and they have seen LiveWorkPlay as a valued partner in helping make that happen for a population that just doesn't get in the conversations, and we're working to change that. And a lot of the employers also enjoy it because it's meeting other employers and meeting other business people and making those connections. Or in the government example, you know, meeting people in other departments that in this huge, you know, thousands of people workplace might never have happened, and making those connections. So we've just been thrilled with how much they are getting out of the experience, and then how in turn it is resulting in employment success for the people we support. And just looking at the time, I can see that we promised you 90 minutes and we're pushing that. So what we're going to do is, after these concluding remarks from Jim and Maurice, we are going to stick around and we will take some Q&A through the chat function, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen, but also through completion of the survey at fptc.ca. Put your questions in there, and we will get back to you directly as appropriate, or incorporate them into future conversations with you. So please do complete the survey, and even if you don't intend on interacting with us further in the future, we still want your feedback, so please do that. And then we'll hear from Jim and Maurice, and then we'll go to some live Q&A. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We encourage you to visit our website. We're going to have that up on the PowerPoint slide. So please let us know the value of today's session and how we can follow up with individual agencies.
We invite you to join the conversations. Be a part of From Presence to Citizenship. All that is required is a willingness of agency leadership to share and exchange information. If you want to be added to our From Presence to Citizenship email, please indicate that on the survey. And also, please feel free to reach out to any one of us who are involved in From Presence to Citizenship. Discuss your agency's plans. Start a mentoring relationship. Arrange for a visit to another organization to see how things are done. Arrange for the leadership from another organization to come to your organization and possibly have some suggestions how you can do things. You can discuss things around how to reform one program in your organization, how to change your culture so you can begin making these changes. Or you can discuss things, and everything starts with one person. You can discuss the supports for that one person to move their supports to person-directed supports.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So some of the discussion, I think, with like-minded leaders will focus more on the agency as a whole. So things like how to begin discussions with your board about reforming services, transformation, reforming supports to individuals, taking it one person at a time, if you like. Also, how do you take the pulse of your agency now? Kind of do an evaluation. Are you treading water? Are you moving forward? Have you been proactive? Or you find yourself slipping back? Also, Jim had mentioned earlier in the presentation about the importance of culture. It is so important. A number of our speakers have mentioned that. But what is the culture of your agency now? And the bigger question is, what do you want it to be?
With the changes that have resulted over the past 10 months in agencies, and in particularly possibly your agency, use the current pandemic to evaluate whether you need to do a restart of segregated programs in 2021 that have been closed or changed. Ask lots of questions if you reach out to any one of us. Challenge myths about individualized supports costing more or the economy of scale rationale.
And finally, listen to what people your agency supports are say about how they want to be supported. Simple questions like, again, like how they want to be supported, where they want to live, with whom. Listen to young people who are transitioning to adult services and what their dreams and goals are for the future. I think together we all can bring change to the DS sector and transform agencies into organizations that we're all proud of. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Whoops. Can you hear me? Okay. I probably messed that up in a variety of ways, but some people did manage to get questions through to me, and we don't have a lot of time. Anyway, we're right at 90 minutes, so that's something. And I think the first question will go to Maurice, because it is about someone identified that they looked up some of what LiveWorkPlay has been doing, and isn't that great? You have these partnerships with nonprofits in Ottawa that have all kinds of buildings and communities, and that's lovely. But we're out in the country, and congregate settings seems one of the only ways that people can get housing. And so what are some of the ways in your rural community that you've innovated and helped people to have a more independent living experience?
Thanks, Keenan. Well, one thing that we've done is we've had to do agency-owned homes just because we haven't had any willing partners. But we also know that in one situation, one of our staff was able to have a home that had a finished a lower level, and then we cost shared to do some changes there to enlarge a window to make a second egress to just make sure that we were complying with all safety issues. So that ended up being a successful place for the individual for almost 20 years. So I think cost sharing and if you need to, then agency-owned homes to create the environment that you need. We usually have 2 or up to 3 people living in a home, but they all have separate units. So it could be upper, lower, or side by side, but we don't have people unless they've requested that to have a roommate or to share those accommodations. So sometimes it just needs, you need to be creative and look at what's available and how it could be transformed into separate apartments for people so that they can exercise their independence as best they can. There's also some housing grants. We've heard of there's some federal programs and some provincial programs that allow for some rent subsidies. So perhaps a larger place that needs to be subsidized and just use whatever is available. That would be my advice.
Unmute. Super. And then if Deb Cavers can unmute herself. Excellent. Question to you on employment. Just what are some of the key messages you found effective with different employers who the experience of people either kind of being afraid to hire a person with disability, not out of any malice, but just like, I'll do the wrong thing, they could get hurt, or I'd have to fire them afterwards, and we'd all feel bad about that. So what are some of the ways that you've helped people feel confident about those sorts of things?
I think just a few things I can think of is, one, obviously, as you mentioned earlier, Keenan, is relationships with employers. So having someone in the organization that has a good match with the employer. We've actually had that conversation with employers. So upfront about, here's what this looks like. What would you do with typical employees? What does a probationary period look like? Even talking upfront and saying things like someone not making through probation, not keeping their job is part of the process of employment. And we've said we will assist people and work with you to help you fire somebody if that's what needs to happen. We've done, I know for some folks, things like working interviews have been really helpful to showcase and take away some of that fear of employers might have of, I'm not sure what to expect, which is usually just because they haven't thought about it, not because there's anything, as you said, that needs to be really seen as different. Another thing is having people doing employment videos. So we have lots of folks that have video resumes who clearly show what their expertise is, what their gifts are, answer some of those visual questions, I think, for employers around, oh, so yeah, this person can do the same as X, Y, and Z. So some of the things I can just think of, but there's obviously lots more. A well-prepared, we call it elevator speech that you have for employers, so that anticipated questions that you have on the tip of your tongue, and that takes a lot of practice. I know that from our experience. That was a lot of practice to do.
No doubt. Excellent. Okay, and then to Marg McLean, a question about how you support your team or newcomers to your team to acquire the learning about the listening with people and just your person-directed approach. What are some of the best training experiences that you've had, or what is the kind of training experience?
It's a really good question. We have a variety of training, and we certainly look for training outside of the organization, but we also do a lot of internal training, and we do that using something that we call Compass. And when we do our Compass training, it's It's for all individuals to have a good chance to think about what are the main key life experiences that provide a good quality of life for people. We talk a lot about respect. We talk a lot about listening. So there's many exercises and things that people are doing. So that's kind of on an agency level, and then also on a team specific, because with our organization, when you apply for a job, you apply basically to work for a specific person or two people. And so you're hired. The first interview is really to go through and ensure that you meet the qualifications for the organization. The second is for the person. And so our orientation and our training to support people is lots of the time done by the person themselves with some support and family. We always really encourage family or the person to be able to tell the person's story, because that really helps give perspective around some of the relationships that are so important to people, and relationships that are important for staff or support people to really understand. So there's orientation with people in training. There's lots of training that's around agency and outside of agency. And then I guess the other part that we like to do a lot of is support people to learn about the community where the person is living. I mean, typically people hire people that are living in the same community, but we really like to make sure that people understand what are the resources in our community. So when folks talked about that community as first resort, there's an opportunity to actually understand that fully and clearly. So it's kind of, that's it, sort of.
Yeah, excellent, thanks. John P., if you can hear me there. Oh, perfect. So since you mentioned a couple of transitions in your agency, a question about both. So with families, the transition from congregate setting and or congregate living. I know that's a big question, but what are some of the keys to supporting families with the kind of changes that may come up with some resistance or fear? Yeah, that's okay. We can actually go to Tina for some of that. If we unmute her, because excellent. You've worked on transitions from congregate living, so.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yep.
Yeah, so we really try to engage with families at the onset, help them be part of finding a location or being part of developing the relationship with a new landlord, and have them see the site before anyone moves, and help them with picking out things that the person might like so it meets their personalities and their needs, answering any questions in advance so that they know that the support isn't tied to the location, and that if things don't work out, that the support will remain with the person. And then engage as much as possible to open opportunities for them to be a part of everyday living. So that's pretty tricky right now with COVID, but generally two folks we support this week are moving, and one went there with his family that he's been living with interimly, and they set up the whole apartment in absence of our staff. Actually, they thought that was something that they could do to fill their time through COVID, and wanted to be a part of all of that. So they're really excited about the process and being a part of it all.
Awesome. And I think everyone's pretty much had enough for today, but maybe Jim, you can finish off with just what do you think, what are your thoughts on a positive influence on government policy towards like a citizenship outcome? Big question, but give it a shot.
I guess the best thing is there's some planning tables right now that are advisory groups to the minister and the assistant deputy minister that several of us from this group sit on. While I can't talk a lot about it because we had to sign non-disclosure documents, some of what we discussed today is what's going to be coming down from government. So reaching out to any one of us to chat, to have a conversation with questions, can only help groups as the new documents from the government come out in the coming months. And,
Awesome.
and the big thing is don't be afraid. This whole thing started because I picked up the phone and I called people I didn't know and said, I heard you know about this. And many of the people I called are part of this group now. It helped us make the lives of the people we support better. And it helps us to support them to live their lives to the fullest, simply because we change the way that we think about supports. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Awesome. Yeah, I see Tony and Sheila hung into the end on video. I feel like if they want to say something, we should offer it, but if they don't.
You never want to offer that to me because I'm a shy guy.
Well, and the Italian in the room too. It's really hard for me to be on mute.
Yeah, I know. I felt like that must have been tough. How was the hockey season up there?
Oh, it was cut short.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I just want to just say that, you know, firsthand experience with From Presence to Citizenship. And I mean, certainly I was a deer in the headlights when I first started this position, and just Jim, Deb, everyone just kind of reached out and wrapped around me. I was able to bring Keenan and Julie, Doug Carton, just to come and take a look and help me kind of get my path, the strategic plan that Jim helped with. So as he said, making the lives of the people we support better. So helpful and integral. So I'm very appreciative, and I want to be a part of this because you guys are making a huge difference. Yeah, it's great.
I would echo the same thing as you know what, there's not a person that are still on video except for Deb, maybe Carvers. Everybody else I've reached out to and been a pain in the ass from the get-go. And I'll be honest with you guys, the experiences, regardless of the conversation we had, I haven't been able to implement as much as I wanted to just because of influences, but I have been successful in closing the shelter workshop and trying to head my agency in a direction, and it's thankful to everybody at this table. Again, you guys don't get the praise for it much, but you know what, everybody but Jim, thank you.
I'm glad we had that ending. Thanks, you two. Okay, I guess that's it. Carry on. Only the beginning.
Take care.
Okay, take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.